My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 28 years old. This is a real story one I never thought I'd share publicly, but what happened in my family was so twisted, so full of betrayal and revenge, that keeping it hidden would feel like letting the guilty walk free. Without giving too much away, I'll just say this fire took more than just our home. It ripped away the mask from the people I loved most, and I learned that sometimes revenge is the only justice you can get. So stay with me until the very end, because every word you're about to hear is a piece of a puzzle that will change the way you look at family forever. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, and share this story so more people can hear it. This story is written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries. I remember the night it all began. A storm had rolled over Oak Ridge, our small quiet town in Vermont, turning the streets into rivers of mud and broken branches, lightning ripping open the sky like jagged glass. Inside our creaky old cedar-smelling house, my mother, father, and older brother were sitting in the living room, the television flickering shadows across their faces. I was in the kitchen pouring tea when I caught the first whiff of something sharp and acrid, not the normal smoky scent of our wood stove, but the stinging, unmistakable smell of something burning that shouldn't be. I walked to the back window and my stomach dropped. Flames were licking up the siding of our barn, climbing faster than any fire I'd ever seen. My father shouted for my brother to grab the hose, but the wind roared like an angry animal, pushing the fire closer to the main house. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the barn was gone and half the house was a blackened skeleton. But what unsettled me most wasn't the fire itself, it was the look on my mother's face as she stood outside in the rain, her lips pressed so tightly together they were bloodless, her eyes not on the flames but on my father, like she knew something I didn't. The next morning, as we sifted through the charred remains, I noticed something odd. The fire hadn't started near the wood stove in the barn, as the fire chief suggested. Instead, it began in a locked storage room that only 3 people in our family had the key to: my father, my brother, and my mother. That same day, a stranger showed up at our property, a man with sun-leathered skin and a faded army jacket. He spoke to my mother in hushed tones, his hand gripping her wrist like he owned her. When I asked her who he was, she brushed me off, but I could see her fingers trembling as she tucked them into her coat pocket. That night, I overheard my parents arguing, my father accusing her of starting something she couldn't control, and my mother firing back that it was the only way to get what we were owed. The word owed stuck with me, buzzing in my mind like a wasp. Owed by who? For what? Over the next few days, the town buzzed with rumors. Some said it was an insurance job gone wrong, others whispered about debts my father might have had. But nothing explained the late-night phone calls my mother was taking, her voice hushed and urgent, or the way my brother had started avoiding me, locking his bedroom door even during the day. It wasn't until a week later when I found a scorched metal lockbox hidden beneath the floorboards in my parents' bedroom that the threads began to unravel. Inside were documents, old property deeds, letters, and a faded photograph of a man I'd never seen before, standing beside our barn decades ago. On the back of the photo was a note in my mother's handwriting: "He gets nothing." That night, I confronted my father about it, but he just told me to stay out of things that didn't concern me. His voice shook, though, like he was barely holding himself together. The more they tried to shut me out, the more determined I became to find out the truth. And the truth I would discover had teeth. Sharp, blood-stained teeth that had been hidden in the dark for far too long, and they were about to tear my family apart. The night after I found that lockbox, sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph, the stranger by the barn, my mother's note, the silent threat in her handwriting. I needed answers, and I knew I wouldn't get them by asking nicely. So the next morning, while my parents were out dealing with the insurance adjuster, I decided to break into my brother Nathan's room. I'd always respected his privacy before, but the way he'd been avoiding me lately felt less like teenage moodiness and more like deliberate secrecy. His room smelled faintly of gasoline, and when I looked closer, I realized why. There was a red plastic gas can tucked under his bed, half empty. My chest tightened. Why would Nathan have that now after the fire? On his desk, I found a crumpled receipt from a hardware store dated 2 days before the fire for accelerant and heavy-duty matches. The moment I heard the sound of tires on gravel outside, I shoved everything back, my hands trembling, and slipped out just as he came up the stairs. That night, I called my best friend Kelsey, the only person I trusted. I told her everything: the gas can, to photograph my mother's arguments with my father. Kelsey went quiet for a moment before saying, "Ratch, what if the fire wasn't an accident at all?" My throat went dry. The thought had been gnawing at me, but hearing it out loud made it real. We decided to dig deeper, starting with the man in the photograph. Oak Ridge is a small town. People talk. Kelsey's uncle ran the local historical society, so we paid him a visit under the pretense of doing a school project. After a bit of small talk, we showed him the photo. His face changed instantly, the way someone's does when a memory they'd rather forget crashes back. "That's William Bill Draven," he said slowly. "Used to own half the farmland around here. Until he lost it in a lawsuit to your grandfather." The story poured out like bitter whiskey. "Decades ago, Bill Draven accused my grandfather of stealing land that rightfully belonged to the Draven family. The case went to court and somehow my grandfather won. Rumor had it that Draven swore revenge, vowing that no Carver would ever live in peace on that land. My mother's maiden name was Draven." Suddenly, a dozen little things from my childhood clicked into place: the way she'd talk about family debts, her bitterness toward my father's side, the hushed conversations I'd overhear when Draven relatives came to visit. But what I couldn't understand was why now? Why burn down the barn after all these years? Kelsey and I went back to the house just before dusk, and as we walked up the driveway, I saw my mother standing at the edge of the burned barn, her back to us, talking to someone in the shadows. When the figure stepped into the fading light, my stomach lurched. It was Bill Draven. He was older now, his hair silver and thin, but his eyes burned with the same intensity as in the photograph. I ducked behind the fence, heart hammering in my chest, and strained to hear. My mother's voice was low, urgent. "It's not enough. We can't just scare him. We have to take it all." Draven's reply was gravelly, almost a growl. "And we will. But your daughter's been poking around. If she gets in the way..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication was clear. That night I locked my bedroom door for the first time in years. The walls of my home felt like they were closing in on me. My father was either in on it or completely blind. My brother had bought accelerant days before the fire, and my mother was conspiring with a man who had vowed revenge against our family before I was even born. Every instinct told me to run to, pack a bag and disappear before I became another casualty of whatever this was, but something stronger kept me rooted. I couldn't just walk away. If they thought they could burn the truth to the ground along with the barn, they were wrong. I was going to find out exactly what taking it all meant, even if it meant putting myself in the crosshairs. What I didn't know was that my search for the truth was about to uncover something far darker than an old family feud. The fire was just the beginning, and the next move in their plan would make the flames look merciful. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hushed voices downstairs. I crept halfway down the staircase, careful to avoid the creaky step near the bottom, and saw my mother, Nathan, and Bill Draven seated at the kitchen table. The curtains were drawn, the air thick with the smell of coffee and cigarette smoke. Bill was sliding a folded piece of paper across the table toward Nathan. "You know what to do," he said, his voice low but commanding. Nathan nodded once, his jaw tight. My mother caught sight of me on the stairs, and for a split second her face went pale. "Rachel, go back to bed," she said sharply, her tone carrying an edge I never heard from her before. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear her words, but I forced myself to act casual, muttering something about looking for my phone charger before retreating to my room. I paced the floor, trying to piece together what I'd seen. Nathan, my own brother, was clearly part of whatever scheme was unfolding, and that piece of paper, whatever it contained, felt like the blueprint for their next move. I had to know what was on it. My chance came sooner than I expected. A few hours later, Nathan left to run errands, and my mother went to town. I slipped into his room, my hands shaking, and searched every possible hiding place. Under his pillow, in the closet behind the dresser, nothing. Then I spotted the corner of something white sticking out from the pages of a thick history book on his desk. I pulled it free and unfolded it, my eyes scanning the contents in disbelief. It was a crude map of our property marked with red X's on the farmhouse, the storage shed, and most chillingly, the old well at the back of the land. Next to the X on the well was a single word written in block letters: remove. My mind raced. What could possibly be in that well that was important enough to destroy? I remembered how my grandfather had warned us as kids never to go near it, claiming it was unstable and dangerous. But now it seemed more like he'd been guarding it, hiding something inside. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way toward the well, my boots crunching on the frost-covered grass. The barn's charred remains loomed in the distance like a blackened skeleton. When I reached the well, I noticed fresh scuff marks in the dirt as if something heavy had been dragged here recently. My hands trembled as I peered over the edge. The air rising from below was cold and smelled faintly metallic. I tied the flashlight to a rope and lowered it slowly, my breath catching when the beam illuminated something glinting far below. It wasn't water. It looked like metal, a large rusted lockbox almost identical to the one I'd found in the attic. Before I could think of how to retrieve it, I heard a sharp crack behind me, the unmistakable sound of a twig snapping underfoot. I spun around and there was Nathan standing just a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes cold. I stammered something about taking a walk, but his gaze shifted to the rope in my hands. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "You don't want to be part of this, Rachel. Trust me." And then he turned and walked away, leaving me frozen in place. That night's sleep was out of the question. I couldn't stop thinking about the lockbox in the well, about the map, about Nathan's warning. Every instinct screamed that whatever was inside that well was the key to this whole nightmare. I decided that if they were planning to destroy it, I had to get to it first. The next evening, when everyone was distracted in the living room, I slipped outside with a length of rope, gloves, and a makeshift pulley I'd borrowed from the shed. Lowering myself into the well was harder than I expected. The walls were slick and the cold bit through my jacket. My fingers ached as I reached the bottom and pried the lockbox free from the mud. It was heavy, far heavier than the one in the attic. Hauled it up, heart racing with a mix of fear and adrenaline. By the time I climbed out, my hands were raw, but I didn't care. I took the lockbox straight to the old chicken coop at the edge of the property where I kept a few tools hidden. It took nearly 20 minutes of prying and hammering before the lock finally gave way with a sharp snap. Inside was a stack of yellowed envelopes bound with twine, a revolver wrapped in oilcloth, and most disturbing of all, a set of black and white photographs showing my father years younger standing beside Bill, driven over what looked like a freshly dug grave. There was no mistaking the location. It was the grove behind the well. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the photographs. Whoever was buried there was the reason for the fire, the map, the lockboxes, maybe even the decades-old feud. And now if my family's plan succeeded, the evidence would be gone forever. But what I didn't know was that they had already realized the lockbox was missing and they were coming for me before I could show anyone what I found. Barely had time to hide the lockbox under an old feed sack before I heard the crunch of boots approaching the chicken coop. My pulse pounded so hard I thought they might hear it. Through a crack in the wooden slats, I saw Nathan's shadow first. Then Bill Draven's broad silhouette looming behind him. "She's here somewhere," Bill muttered, his voice carrying that low, dangerous tone that made my skin crawl. I slipped to the back of the coop, easing the door open just enough to squeeze through, and bolted toward the woods. The cold air burned my lungs as I ran, the photographs clutched tightly against my chest. Branches whipped at my face and my boots slid on patches of frozen ground, but I didn't stop until I reached the old hunting trail my father used to take me on as a child. I ducked behind a fallen log, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing with only one thought: I had to get these photos to someone I could trust. But who? The sheriff was out of the question. He was Bill's cousin and had been to our house more times than I could count for friendly visits. Most of the neighbors either owed Bill favors or were too afraid to cross him. Then I remembered someone, Daniel Harper, a local reporter who had once written an expose about corruption in the county. My father had called him a troublemaker, but I always liked him. If anyone would listen, it was Daniel. I waited until nightfall before creeping back to the house. The windows glowed warm against the dark, and I could see my mother pacing the living room, talking on the phone. I didn't risk going inside. Instead, I slipped into the garage, grabbed my father's old truck keys from a hook, and eased the door open just enough to back the truck down the gravel driveway without turning on the headlights until I was far enough away. Every turn of the wheels felt like a countdown, like I was stealing time that could run out at any second. When I reached the edge of town, I parked a block from Daniel's office and carried the lockbox and photos in a tote bag. The street was quiet, the only sound the hum of the street lamp overhead. I knocked softly at first, then harder. After a long pause, the door cracked open and Daniel appeared, looking tired and wary. "Rachel? What are you doing here?" he asked. I pushed past him and set the tote on his desk, spilling the photographs onto the wood. I don't have much time, I said, my voice shaking. They're from the grove on my family's land. That man with my father is Bill Draven. Daniel's eyes widened as he flipped through the pictures. Do you know who this is? He asked, pointing to the man lying in the shallow grave. I shook my head, but the name he spoke next made my blood run cold. That's Sheriff Alan Price's brother. He went missing 25 years ago. My breath caught. It suddenly made sense, the sheriff's protection, the silence, the fear. My father and Bill had buried the sheriff's own brother behind our well, and now they were trying to erase it. All before Daniel could say more, a sudden bang rattled the front window, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot shattering glass. Daniel grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the back door. Go, he shouted. We sprinted into the alley, the sound of footsteps pounding after us. Another shot rang out, striking sparks from the brick wall inches from my head. I followed Daniel through a narrow gap between two buildings, my heart hammering. We didn't stop running until we reached the back lot of an abandoned food store. Daniel pulled out his phone, hands shaking. I've got enough here to blow this wide open, he said, snapping quick photos of the evidence. But before he could hit send, headlights swept over us, blinding in the darkness. Bill's truck screeched to a stop and Nathan jumped out, a gun in his hand. Rachel, he called, his voice steady but heavy with something I couldn't read, guilt maybe or regret. You don't understand. Dad was protecting us. I stepped forward, my voice breaking. Protecting us? He murdered someone, Nathan. And you're helping him cover it up. Bill moved toward me, his face twisted with rage, but Daniel stepped between us, holding his phone high. The police are already on their way, he led, his voice calm. For a moment I thought Bill might shoot him anyway, but Nathan hesitated, lowering his gun slightly. That pause was all it took. Red and blue lights flooded the lot, sirens wailing. It wasn't the sheriff, it was the state police. Daniel had managed to send a single photo in our location in the seconds before the headlights appeared. Bill cursed, tossing his gun to the ground, and Nathan just stood there, his eyes locked on mine, looking like a boy who just realized he'd been playing for the wrong side all along. In the days that followed, the grove was dug up and the truth spilled out, not just about the sheriff's brother, but about a string of disappearances going back decades, all tied to my father and Bill Draven. My mother claimed ignorance, but I knew she'd chosen silence over justice long ago. Nathan was charged as an accessory, though he struck a deal by testifying against the others. I left town soon after, unable to bear the weight of the memories. Lockboxes, the well, the fire, all of it had been part of a plan to bury the past. But the past is a way of clawing its way back to the surface, no matter how deep you try to hide it. And sometimes the people you thought were your family turn out to be the ones you needed protecting from all along.